David A. Bossert has been working with the Disney company for a bunch of years during a time of historic transformation that spans roughly from the Black Cauldron to Fantasia 2000. He's also done work on two of my other favorite animated projects, which is Clerks, the animated series, and Ren and Stimpy. But in more recent years, he has become a fine Disney historian. So it's a great honor for me to be able to talk to him now. David, thank you for giving me some time.
John, thanks very much for having me on your show. I appreciate it and look forward to our conversation.
So the new book, Claude Coats, Walt Disney's Imagineer, The Making of Disneyland, From Toad Hall to the Haunted Mansion and Beyond, celebrates one of those Disney legends who is overdue for a book devoted just to him. I think because he's maybe one of the more buttoned down of the Disney.
I was going to say, I think he was just a more introverted individual. He wasn't somebody who was always out seeking the spotlight and doing tons of interviews. In fact, it was a bit of an issue for us when I started working on this project because he hadn't done a lot of interviews.
And yet, the Tony Baxter story about when he was selling popcorn as a cast member at Disneyland, right? He played hooky and basically just ran off to go look at Pirates of the Caribbean when it was being built, and he didn't want to get caught, so he was like at a really, awkward angle, and Claude Coats called him down to give him a personal tour.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was the kind of person that's such a great story that Tony conveys in his foreword to the book. And I have to say, what an amazing experience, but it shows how Claude was just this very gentle, giving individual. And almost unflappable. And by the way, I had the pleasure, John, of meeting Claude early in my career at Disney. I was just beginning my career, and Claude was in the twilight of his. And I got to meet him and get to know him a little bit over about an 18-month period before he retired. And he was just an incredibly nice man. And somebody who was gracious, was approachable, was willing to stand and talk with you, and was focused on you when he did, and answered questions and was very straightforward and just a lovely guy.
Yeah, he sounds like maybe he was introverted, but he also seems really friendly.
Yes, absolutely. Very friendly. But again, I don't think he was somebody who sought the limelight, and he viewed himself. The one thing that I emphasize in the book, and this was all from doing interviews with people like Marty Sklar and Tony and many other Imagineers that knew him and worked with him, was that he always viewed himself as being part of the team. Mm-hmm. He didn't want to, he wasn't taking credit for any one thing, even though he was the show designer for Pirates of the Caribbean. There's video footage of Walt walking up and putting his hand on Claude's shoulder and saying, "This is Claude Coats." He's introducing him to Julie Ream, the first Disneyland ambassador. He's like, "This is Claude. He's in charge of the Pirates attraction," and so you can't dispute that the guy was the top dog for Pirates of the Caribbean, and yet he always felt he was part of a team.
Well, I think also Walt probably saw something of a kindred spirit in him. Of course, Walt could do that maybe with almost anybody who wasn't like a maniac, but someone who was very thoughtful. And, there's a great anecdote in which, they were wondering how to do the cascading waterfalls for, the nature ride at Disneyland.
Yeah, the Nature's Wonderland and going into the caverns.
Yeah, and an engineer just said, "Oh yeah, what you want to do, it's not going to work. It can't. It's too easy for all of it to go wrong." And so Claude conveyed that to Walt, which is different than telling Walt no, because that was a mistake. You never do that. But he said, the engineer said you couldn't, it's impossible. And Walt said, good, we're doing it anyway.
Well, I mean, that's a great story, because literally it was a rocket scientist. It was Hans Haber, who was at the studio consulting on the man in space pictures. So you have a rocket scientist telling Claude that's statistically impossible to do, and then Claude conveying that, hey, this rocket scientist Hans Haber says it's impossible for us to do it. And there you get one of the famous quotes from Walt, where he just looked at Claude and he says, it's kind of fun to do the impossible, isn't it? And walked off. So he had total confidence that Claude was going to figure it out, and he did figure it out.
So that this relatively quiet artist was able to just keep thinking about the problem and then do a lot of experiments, trial and error, until that thing you wanted, that thing that is, right, it's not statistically impossible, it's just almost impossible. But
and I think, I have to say, John, one of the things I got out of working at the Walt Disney Company for more than 32 years was the fact that I don't take no. When somebody says, no, we can't do that, my immediate visceral reaction is, wait a second, how could we do that?
Right.
There's got to be a way that we could do something, regardless of what the no is for. Oftentimes, the easiest place for people to go to is no, we can't do that. Well, why can't you do that? And by the way, I remember when I was at the studio, I was doing some consulting with brand management and legal, and they asked me, they came to me and they said, well, this person is requesting 150 images, and we can't just do that. And I said, why not? And they said, because we only allow for up to 20 images. And I said, why? And they said, well, that's because we've always done that. That was the answer. And I said, well, why can't we change that? And then there was this pause, like, I don't know. And then there was further conversation. And you have to look at things on an individual basis. That particular instance, there was an artist who had done an enormous amount of movie posters for the company, and he had passed away, and his wife was putting a book together. And part of that book was to show the process, the various comps that, an artist would do for a movie poster before you get to the final movie poster. You might come up with dozens of different concepts that are drawn out, and somebody comes along and says, well, I like a little of this and I like a little of that. Then they do some more comps, and it's an iterative process that is part of the creative process. And so she wanted to show multiple iterations of these posters that her husband did. And of course, in a book about the artist, you're going to have more than 20 images. I mean, you could have 20 images for one movie poster, and so I think, you have to step back and understand where the no is coming from. And in that particular instance, the no, we can't do that. They didn't know why. They just had always done it that way. And it's sort of like, well, can we change that? And we did, and we wound up changing it. And the widow of this artist was able to put an enormous amount of her husband's work into the book.
Yeah, when you said legal, I knew they're really big on no over at legal.
Oh, listen, I can tell plenty of stories about dealing with legal at the Walt Disney Company, but I'm not going to, because some of those stories would surely open up a can of worms.
But overall, like, even legal has a job to do, which is, right, to help keep the Disney brand stay special. And so if any image went anywhere, then that's also a problem. Though I would argue it's a giant problem if you ask, why can't we do it? And then they don't know, but they still just want that no to stand. It's like, that's a problem.
But again, it really, when people are out in the world and somebody says, no, we can't do that, you have to say, well, why can't you do it? And what can we do to make this happen in this particular instance? And certainly there's some situations where a no is a no. It's you can't go over the fence into the White House. Right? No, that's no trespassing. I mean, somebody could do it, but they're going to get arrested. But I mean, in normal situations, everyday situations, when somebody says no to you, you have to say, well, how come? And sort of unpack that no and figure out why it is a no, and if you can change that to a yes. And I've often done that many, many times when somebody had said no to me.
Well, I'm a creative writer and I teach creative writing, and part of my job is to instill these rules of creative writing to my students. And the why that rule exists is always way more important than the rule itself. And so sometimes my students will have things that don't work, and if I'm patient enough, I will express my concern about it in a way that maybe respects that creative impulse. Like, okay, this is what you wanted to do. I don't think it's working. You may just want to go a different way with it, but if you stick with it, like, here are some options that you might try. Or I could do the Walt Disney approach, which is, this isn't working, but it might work. You figure it out. And then I could just let them creatively go to work on the problem. But I try and express the problem without necessarily shutting down the creative process and saying, nope.
Yeah. And look, rules to me are guidelines, and rules are also made to be broken in certain instances if you can justify why you're breaking the rule.
Yeah.
And that's, again, that's part of stretching the creativity and blowing through some rules, and you may break a rule and go down a pathway, ultimately hitting a wall where you shouldn't have broken that rule, but that's part of the exploratory process of creativity.
Well, and I think this reflects the career of Claude Coats and also the culture that Walt Disney himself tried to foster artistically within the company. So, he studies art in college, some architecture, but he decides he doesn't want to be an architect, even though he kind of loves architecture, but becomes an artist and comes on to Disney as a background artist, which means you're almost never going to get the praise for the work, no matter how good. It's like being a great offensive lineman. Like, if you do your job well, then they're going to be celebrating the quarterback. They're not going to be celebrating you. Even though his backgrounds, and I remember seeing images of, okay, here are the backgrounds without the characters in the foreground. And it's just mind-bogglingly good how fascinating the artwork is, because it's simultaneously, and I think this is something Walt wanted, cartoony and realistic, so that there's a sense of depth, and light is doing all kinds of interesting things that it can't do with simplistic animation. You can't, the Claude Coats effects aren't cheap. They're not quick and easy. They are paintings. And
but I do think, though, that when he started as a background painter, he was already an accomplished watercolor painter when he joined the studio, and I think Walt recognized his talent because he gave him the opportunity to do the Old Mill. And the Old Mill, which is one of my favorite shorts, won an Academy Award. But from Claude's perspective, that was a background picture. That was all about creating mood in the environments, creating these wonderful environments around this old mill, and how a storm comes in. And, granted, they were using that short to test a lot of new camera techniques with the multiplane camera before they were going to do Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And they certainly did some very successful effects with the camera on that picture. But ultimately, it's a background picture, and it evokes emotion from the environments, and any character animation of the animals and inhabitants of the mill are secondary to the overall atmosphere of the environment.
Yeah, there's barely a story. There is a story, but the story is basically, will this mill and the animals taking refuge in it survive this storm? And that's it. It's enough.
It was fairly simple, but it was very emotional, and it garnered an Academy Award, which is fantastic. And also, Walt, from that picture, put Claude in charge of the wishing well sequence in the opening of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And he went on to head backgrounds on many pictures and do color styling, and really put a tremendous amount into those what I consider golden age animated features from the studio. But after 20 years of doing that, he worked on everything from Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs up to Lady and the Tramp. He himself was wanting to stretch creatively and do more. And that kind of came at a really perfect time for him, because on Lady and the Tramp, he had built some models for the artist to use as reference for getting the dog's eye point of view in rooms within the house. And that's where his architectural background, his education, came into play. He's building these models. Well, certainly Walt took note of that and asked him to build a model of Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, which he did. And then Walt asked him if he would do some small flats or backdrops for the model. And he did that and passed it off, thinking that the art director was going to do it. And then one day, Walt walks into his office while he's talking, Claude is talking to Ken Anderson. Walt comes in and says, "Hey, my vendor can't finish Toad's Wild Ride for Disneyland. I need you guys to do it." And really, that was like the perfect moment. That was, Claude said, absolutely, and that was really the beginning, I think, of him becoming an Imagineer.
Yeah. So this thing that you really couldn't have anticipated, which is, okay, Walt Disney wants three-dimensional spaces that feel like some of their films. Like, that didn't exist. That nowhere did that exist. And then Walt Disney wanted it, and as often happened when the Disney company wanted to build things in the real world, ordinary businesses were like, "Hey, we can't do this."
Well, I think it was more the company that was going to do Toad was also doing Peter Pan and the Snow White's Adventure, which became Snow White's Scary Adventure. I think those were, it was a situation where the vendor just didn't have enough labor, didn't have the talent to be able to get everything completed by the opening of when Disneyland was opening. So I think this was an appropriate response. It was, Walt always was bobbing and weaving. And sort of, if plan A isn't working, go to plan B and C and D, but there was always going to be a way. And look, I've said this many times. One of Walt's greatest talents is as a casting director. He was able to see in people things that those people didn't see in themselves. And he put people together that you wouldn't think would work together, who did work together well, and created magnificent things.
I think of the story of Raleigh Crump's additions to the Haunted Mansion, but he didn't know how they were going to fit in. So he just had his own table in the corner, and all the other Imagineers were, you know, to put it kindly, skeptical of his random things for the Museum of the Weird. And Walt looked at it and then kind of walked away. And they all said, "Oh, you're in trouble." But then when Raleigh gets to work the next morning, there's Walt sitting in front of all of Raleigh's stuff, thinking about it. And it kind of got integrated a little bit randomly or, you know, spread out. But even though Walt couldn't figure out exactly how it fit right this second, he was captivated by what Raleigh was doing, which is enough to keep an idea alive. And so I wonder how much Walt Disney slept at night, because I think he was always thinking, how can I make everything just a little bit better?
Yeah, and also, he was known for wandering around the studio on weekends and at night, and going into people's offices and things like that. So look, he invested his entire life into it all. But, he had people like Claude Coats and Mark Davis and all of these, Exitencio and all these artists who he was handpicking to work on Disneyland, and he was building something different. And certainly it's been enduring, that's for sure. But, I have to say, somebody like Claude Coats, I think this book was received really well because so many people knew the name but didn't really know much about him.
And the art that you've selected to go with this, that's part of the thrill of getting any new Disney book like this, is just seeing so much new art. And just what it does is it invites the reader to participate in the imaginative process and just practically enjoy the experience of, okay, what was it like as Claude was figuring out these problems? And or just what kind of art did he make for fun?
And something, I mean, this book would not have been achievable without Alan Coates, Claude's son, because Alan had kept an incredible archive of material related to his father, including all the paintings and many of the paintings that his father had done for pleasure. And from the beginning of this project, we had always felt that we were going to put a gallery of artwork in the back of Claude's personal paintings, for people to see, and not only see, but see the arc of his development as a painter from the 1930s into the 1980s, because he was a master of watercolor. He became a master of gouache, acrylic, mixed media, and he loved to travel, and he loved to paint places he traveled to. And
blacklight painting as well.
And he became the resident expert on blacklight painting, just because Walt basically said, "Claude, you go do it." So that's the great thing, because I often tell people who are just starting out in the business, when somebody comes and says, "Hey, can you do such and such?" just say yes, even if you don't know. Just say yes. I'll go. I can try that, and go figure it out. This is how you grow artistically. This is how you expand, your creative abilities and get the creative juices flowing. Is to go try something you haven't done before.
I just watched a documentary on The Nightmare Before Christmas, and apparently, Danny Elfman was in the mix of people involved, and then they just informed him, "Oh yeah, you're doing the score." And he's like, "I'm doing this." He goes, "I've never done a score." And eventually he's just like, "Okay, I'm doing a score." And, kind of changed his life.
Yeah. I mean, he became he's one of the premier film scorers out there, film composers,
And when you listen to The Nightmare Before Christmas, could you have asked for a better composer? I don't think so.
Yeah, exactly. So, I just think that, oftentimes people are fearful of the unknown, and the immediate response is to recoil some and say, no, I can't do that. And part of that is the conditioning you get as a child, when you have people saying, adults are saying to you, no, don't, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. No, you're constantly bombarded with that kind of stuff, and it hurts you. I think you have to open yourself up to things that you aren't familiar with, and to be willing to learn those things, and to say, hey, look, I have to say, John, when somebody, if somebody had asked me 15, 20 years ago, would you ever write a book? I would have laughed and said, me, I don't think I could do a book, And then all of a sudden somebody asked me, you should put all those stories about Roy Disney into a book. And I said, okay, let me try that. And by the way, I'm going to go back and rewrite that book, because that was my first effort. And I think I've come much further as a writer since then. And one of my goals is to go back and rewrite that book.
Well, I hope you come back on the show when that happens.
And the other thing too is I want to add a lot more pictures, because the one thing I know with these Disney books is that people want to see images. So I'm trying to find a balance between writing a compelling text, but also balancing it with enough images for people to understand and enjoy the text, because they can see something.
One of the things that I've learned from Didier Guez is that there's something special about seeing new image. Like, I'm a Disney fan. I've been a Disney fan, like, diehard since the 90s. And I could point at two things that affected me that made me lock in and go, oh no, I haven't just liked Disney for my whole life. Like, this is in my bones at a certain point. But as Disney fans, we've seen so many Disney images over the years, so that when we actually get to experience a whole lot of new images we haven't seen before, especially in the telling of history, it's so exciting, and it does enrich the storytelling. As a lifelong writer, I want to say, yeah, we don't need photos.
And we don't, but
for
if
Disney,
you have them,
for Disney, you do.
It's such a plus.
I think you really do need it. And for me, as somebody telling these stories, there's two things I want to do. I want to tell stories that haven't been told before, which I think I've been doing with the projects I'm picking. And I also want to show images people haven't seen before. So I'm doing deep dives into various archives, and I'm finding stuff that people haven't seen before. And when I show an image to somebody like Didier, who we both know, and he's not seen it, then I know I've struck gold. When he gets excited, oh my gosh, I've never seen that before, Dave. That's an exciting thing.
You're like, gotcha. All right, I'm in.
And I think the people that are purchasing these books really appreciate it, because so many images are repeated over and over and over again. That people are like, I've seen that image a half a dozen times in different things, and so I want to make sure when I put a book out that there's images in that book that people haven't seen before, and I think I was able to do that well enough with the Claude Coats book.
So it's it's one of the finest books in my collection. When I opened it up out of the box from the press, the Old Mill press, I didn't cry, but it was an emotional experience. And like, this is before I even open up the book, Dave. I'm holding the book and I'm like, this has been so lovingly packaged, and it's such a gorgeous book, and it's a heavy, like, coffee table book, and yet it's a little bit different. And like, there's, when we say coffee table book, we expect, all right, a lot of pictures, not much prose, and like, this is, like, there's plenty of prose here, like, there's a lot of writing, but as an art object, like, this was just a great enhancement to someone who's already spoiled with a perfectly oversized Disney library. I'm one of those Disney fans. And so, can you talk a little bit about the process of how you published this book and, how it ended up being this absolutely lovely book as an object?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, I couldn't have done the book without collaborating with Alan Coats, Claude's son, and but also for me, when I create a book, I want the book to be a beautiful work of art. I want it to be an object that people enjoy holding. And so all the materials I weighed in on. I weighed in on the fact that from everything from the weight of the paper to how the paper's coated. We were on this particular book. We went with 150 GSM paper, which is a heavier paper stock. You're not going to be able to see an image through the paper when you're holding a page up.
You'd have to be Superman to do that.
So I think that was important, especially when you're putting photographs and artwork into a book. You don't want to have the backside of the page bleeding through and muddying an image that you're looking at. So that was very important. The fact that the pages are matte coated, meaning that the page itself has a matte finish to it, doesn't have a sheen. It makes it easier for you, to read the text, but also to look at the images, and then to do a spot varnish on the images in the book again enhances just the viewing pleasure of those images. The end pages, most people don't even think about the end pages. They're usually just white. Yep. We've been very much adamant about doing something with the end pages. In the Claude Coats book, we actually did a detail of the sky of one of his paintings. We wanted that sense of brush strokes, so that when you first open the cover of the book, you're looking at these essentially 2 pages of brush strokes and color before you actually get into the book. On the 3D Disneyland book that I authored last year with Ted Kiersey's photographs, we took a classic image of an audience in a theater with 3D glasses on, and went so far as, when you open the front of the book, the audience is looking into the book. When you finish the book, the audience is looking into the book. So it was reversing the images, but we're thinking through each of the details. On the actual book cover, we used what it's referred to as like a soft cover laminate, or a soft laminate, or I like to say a velvet touch laminate. So when you actually pick the book up, it feels there's a tactile experience of just holding the book itself. I mean, wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. Often with books like that, there's either a dust jacket, and I'm also the kind of nerd, like I cover my dust jackets with like a library grade like cover, so that if I, God forbid, take it into a bar or something, like it has a chance of coming out of there still being in civilized shape.
I don't particularly care. I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I don't particularly care for dust jackets. Partly because they get scuffed up and torn up.
Yeah, no, I like them, but
if I didn't have the option of covering them up, then they would be basically worthless. And once the dust jacket doesn't look good, then the book doesn't look good, which is like, well, then why have the dust jacket in the first place? But often with books like this, they'll have like a real high gloss finish, which just makes it feel tacky and sticky.
It makes it feel like it's a textbook or something. And again, we're sitting there analyzing all aspects of the book, because that's really what I want to do. When my Dolly and Disney book, I weighed in on a lot of things, but I did not get my way on that, because it has a dust jacket, and I don't particularly care for the way the dust jacket ages or handles, if you will, because it's not my favorite dust jacket, and I would have done something differently. Now, on the special edition of the Dolly and Disney book, there is no dust jacket. There's just the book case, but it goes into a slip case as well. So.
Well, mine looks glossy, but that's because I have my library grade.
Yeah, you have your
cover
your clear celluloid cover on it. Yeah, which is great. I certainly appreciate it. But on the books that I'm currently doing, look, on my Kem Weber book, I wound up doing. We did do a dust jacket, but we did a dust jacket that was on heavier grade paper. And it also had a texture printed on it that makes it feel like a piece of wood. There's like a wood grain texture on the hardcover version of Kem Weber, which we thought was kind of cool. But each book stands on its own, and I've been fortunate on most of the books that I've worked on, that I've written. I've had some say in how they're being designed.
Well, with Old Mill, it seems like you have more leeway.
I have had a lot more leeway than I have had at Disney. That's for sure.
So while I imagine there's pride to be taken in being published by, Disney publications, there's also something to be said of getting the book exactly the way you want it.
I believe so. And I was a Disney artist. I have opinions that I want to, put into things that I'm creating, and having more flexibility now than I've had in the past is certainly a positive. That's all I'll say about it, because, look, for me, I'm more interested in putting together a really high quality book that people like yourself and other book files out there who want to, who have these collections and they want perfect books. For me, I want them to have a perfect book because I want a perfect book. I hate the fact that, if somebody buys one of my books off of an online retailer, the book is thrown into a box and sent to their house, and it's sloshing around inside of a box. And more often than not, the spine gets damaged, or corner gets dented, and it's not a perfect book. And if it's really damaged severely, they have to send it back. And I would much rather see the books packaged properly before they're mailed out.
And so, there's always cost benefit analysis that has to go on. But when it comes to books like these, and they're not cheap, although they're also not bizarro expensive, you could be lower middle class and afford these books.
Well, something, it's not like it's a $200 book. It's, right. In my mind, it's reasonably priced for what you're getting. And, books cost, if you're going to do a quality book, it costs.
Well, I've never seen a book packed I sent Old Mill a thank you note just for sending me the book so well. Besides the book just being great, the pains they took. So let's dig a little deeper into the topic, but stay positive, and let's talk about Old Mill a little bit. So what is publishing with them like? Because it seems like they are simpatico with the things that seem to make you feel very satisfied as an artist and a writer.
All I would say about it is that I think there's more care in the topics that they're choosing. There's more care in how the book is being put together, and there's much more care in how those books are being shipped out if people purchase them directly from the publisher, as opposed to, going to other online retailers, which shall remain nameless. But something, there is I have found over the years, John, that I've gotten notes from people saying that, they don't want to buy from some of the online retailers, that where else can they get the book? And the thing that I would say to the audience is that if you have a favorite independent bookstore in your area that you want to support, go to them and tell them you want a certain book. They can get that book for you. You may have to wait a week or two for the book to be shipped to the bookstore, but support your local independent bookseller. They have struggled through the pandemic. They have struggled with online behemoths taking a lot of the business away, because you can buy a book and get it tomorrow or in 2 days. But you know what? Your online bookseller can also get those same books, and when it comes in, they're not throwing it in a box and having it get dented and stuff. They're going to take it out of the packaging from the distributor, and they're going to put it aside, and they're going to say your book is in, and you go by and pick it up. We've become such a society of instant coffee, and I have to have it same day delivery or this or that. But if you really want to just slow down a little bit and get a new book that's coming out, go to your independent bookseller. They can get any book for you. They don't have to have it in stock. They can just get it for you.
Or you could order it direct from Old Mill, I think.
Or you can order it directly from the Old Mill Press. But there's other small book publishers out there that are doing similar kinds of things. And all I would say about that is, you do what you feel comfortable with, but a book like some of the books like Claude Coats' book, people could pre-order that book for months before it was shipped out. And when it was shipped out, I think people were pleasantly surprised with how it was packaged and, all of that. But, again, everybody has their comfort zone.
I'm a jaded books journalist of sorts, and I get free books several times a week. And this was like Christmas, opening up that box from Old Mill. And I knew the book was coming. It wasn't a surprise that the book was coming. And everything about that experience was just magical, right down to, yes, the weight of the pages, the new book smell, the feel of the cover. Everything about it.
But that's what a book should be. The book should be an immersive experience, not just with the content that you're reading, but the content that you're viewing and how you're holding it. And you've just mentioned it's a sensory experience. The smell, the new book smell, the feel of that, velvet touch laminate on the cover, the seeing that text and seeing those images that you haven't seen before, and just thoroughly immersing yourself and enjoying that book. I mean, that to me is what the book reading experience is all about. Look, there's a lot of people that download books onto e-readers and things like that. But there's nothing like actually curling up with a really good book in your hands and not having, an electronic device and sort of just unplugging yourself from today's world and falling into the book.
And I just can't imagine you would have a screen big enough to do justice to the Claude Coats book.
I don't think there is, but I will tell you there is an ebook version of that will be available. And there's an ebook version of the 3D Disneyland book that's going to be available. And I have to say, I kind of was hesitant on seeing an ebook of either one of these. But I just felt like, okay, look, there's people out there that want to just download these books onto an e-reader. And I do know that many of today's e-readers are able to handle color and the images, and and the book will look good on those devices. That's not how I want to consume it, but you know what? That's just me. There's plenty of people out there who do want to consume it on a digital device, and so be it. I want to make it available for them to enjoy if that's how they want to enjoy it.
If they have to.
Yeah. And that was my attitude. I was like, okay, well, if that's what they want, okay, let them have it.
So I went through this transformation, and I think it was like 89, 90, 91. Little Mermaid comes out, and for the first time in years, Disney was a truly exciting company again. I think I saw Roger Rabbit after the fact, because that would have been enough to kickstart me and get me excited, even though technically Touchstone. But that happened, and then I was on a trip in the Magic Kingdom, and I was headed to the big restaurant in Tomorrowland. And they used to have these shimmering, futuristic, like tacky 1970s Star Trek-y futuristic shimmery panels that were gone. And I just felt shocked. Like, you just stole a part of my childhood. Like, and that was the first time I think I had felt that about Walt Disney World. Obviously, things change all the time, but that was like, no. It turns out that was a beloved thing. I didn't know it was beloved until it was gone. And I think that's when I started to take a deep interest in Disney history, because it all changes, which means, if I want to know what I have experienced, I have to, be able to place everything in history and try and appreciate it while it's here, while trying to be appreciative of the creative new things that are also happening. I also was earning my PhD when Mr. Toad went away in Walt Disney World, and I think I've still never recovered from that, because it's better than the one that was in Disneyland, because it had the two tracks.
And Claude Coats did the one for Walt Disney World, because when he finished the Haunted Mansion, he started working on Walt Disney World and translating a lot of the attractions that he had done for Disneyland down to the Florida park. But I always say this to people who are upset when something disappears from the park. Walt's philosophy was that the park would never be finished. It was an ever-changing environment, that things would go away and new things would come in, and I really believe that is, to me, the philosophy that they have to stay with. But there's certain things, like I would be incredibly upset if they decided to close Pirates of the Caribbean, or Alice in Wonderland, or in Disneyland, Mr. Toad and Peter Pan and the Snow White dark rides. Those are all mainstays. But
well, I can't accept that explanation for Mr. Toad, because it was popular. It's not like it was drooping and it's like, okay, we need to change. It was, Winnie the Pooh is the most popular character in the world. Let's build a gift shop and put a ride in there. And, but if I try and find, okay, what is the silver lining to, because, and kind of it shouldn't be a Disney ride, certainly not the cliche of a Disney ride the way people think of it. It's more like a Coney Island Madhouse experience, kind of a dark ride. And in the Walt Disney World version, you have like Mr. Toad going crazy on one track and Mr. Toad going crazy on another track, but they meet in the middle and you see all these cars flying around in this tiny space. And you're like, there's no way this isn't an accident. Like, it just so overwhelms your brain that you're like, this, like, it's already a crazy ride. It doesn't go that fast, but goes pretty fast for a tiny little space, like driving around inside his house. And so I miss that ride so much. But the silver lining is it made me appreciate everything I liked so much more, realizing like, okay, like anything could go away. Anything I like could become less popular, or
I think anything can go away to a limit. I think that there are certain attractions at the parks that will get refurbished, from time to time, but they're never going to go away. There would be such an outcry over it. So that's how I would look at it. And look, John, you can always fly to California and ride Mr. Toad at Disneyland.
I have,
and it was a borderline spiritual experience.
but it's also not quite as good as the one we had down here because of
it wasn't the same. And by the way, I have the same feeling about Pirates in Orlando. Pirates in Orlando is not the same as Pirates at Disneyland. Pirates at Disneyland is much longer. And I so appreciate the Disneyland version over the Orlando version.
And it was closed for refurbishment when I visited Disneyland.
That's got to be frustrating.
Yeah, someday I do need to go back.
You can't visit Disneyland like January, February, March, because that's typically when they're going to close an attraction and do refurbishment.
I think I was there during a spring break.
So, it's that winter into spring period. If you went during the summer, it would have been open, I bet.
So I wonder, if your time as working for the Disney company in animation and just seeing how radically that changed while you were there, did that enhance your sense of the importance of Disney history? Is that part of the backstory of you becoming a writer?
I think that one of the things that I had always enjoyed just in life is history, understanding and reading about history. Even today, I've been reading, during this pandemic, dozens of books and on a variety of different topics. For me, that's a pleasurable experience. Working at the company, I certainly was very much interested in the history of things and how things were done. When I worked on Fantasia 2000, I remember going to the archives and looking through the old notebooks from the paint lab for how they did certain effects on the original Fantasia. And, I think when you do a film like Fantasia 2000, those are big shoes that you're trying to fill by, doing this sort of next iteration of the Fantasia franchise. And so I did a lot of homework on that. Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, the same thing. I was just curious, and a lot of it is just my curiosity about topics, and also topics that people don't normally spend much time on. As I'm talking to you right now, I'm sitting at a 1939 Kem Weber animation desk that the studio gave me when I left. And when I was working on a book project, and I sat back and I looked at this desk and I thought to myself, I wonder if anybody's really done any, in-depth research or writing about this Kem Weber furniture. Because it was designed specifically for the Disney animation process. Kem talked with the various artists in different disciplines at the studio in designing the desk for each of those disciplines. And I wanted to know more about it. And I went down a rabbit hole to do a lot of, research and to find his archives and to interview people from the different disciplines to get their thoughts on the desks that they were using during the period in which we were all doing 2D animation. And so for me, that was a topic that I think most people hadn't thought about. And I wanted to document it before we were all gone, before this generation of artists who were really, if you think about it, during this renaissance of Disney animation, we were the last generation of artists that were going to work on those 2D animation desks. Because everything shifted to computer generated, and the people doing computer generated were working with different tools on different types of desks. And so to me, I think it's important to dig up history and to do the research and to document stuff that hasn't been documented before.
So there's kind of an artistic curiosity happening.
Oh, absolutely. Without question. There always is, you just sit there and think about just the pencil that we were using, what made that, I often laugh because I have one right here. I have a bunch of them on my desk, but I have a yellow number 2 Ticonderoga pencil, and I've been using these since I was in, kindergarten. To me, I've done so much animation with one of these pencils on so many different films, and I still have them on my desk, and I'm always curious, how do they make pencils? And and I've gone in and looked up that information and read about it.
Well, that sounds great.
So, it is all about the history. And I often say to people, there's still thousands of stories about Disney that haven't been told. I mean, they've got multiple books out on Peter Pan or, Pinocchio or, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. But there is still tons of stories where they have not documented it, and they have not told the stories that are behind it. And that's what I'm hoping to do on all the book projects I have lined up going out into the future.
Well, I think the Disney company hasn't done a terrible job in chronicling its own history, but I also think that, like, one of the upsides of the internet was there was this Disney fan community who, once they could communicate directly to each other, they ended up doing some pretty exciting things and recognizing, a lot of the Imagineers that worked on Disneyland are still alive, and some of them are willing to talk to us. And I think that's also, this wave of enthusiasm for Disney history kind of began to some degree with the fans. I mean, there were some good Disney books out there, but watching what Disney fans who, didn't have to worry about, okay, if I interview this person, how is that going to make a marketable product? It's like, no, they just passion project after passion project. I think of the E-Ticket magazine and Persistence of Vision and all these other really great fanzines that came up, and then podcasts. And, so while I think Disney is certainly willing to participate when it sees something it can do, I also think that this larger movement of Disney historians is really exciting.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with you. And I think that, it's going to continue to grow. I think that there's many, many more stories to be told. I think there's stories that people want to tell.
So whatever this next bit is, let's plug your podcast.
Oh, yeah. Something, the podcast is the Skull Rock podcast. And it's just over a year old. We do a weekly show, and I've been getting a lot of people that I know to come on the show and talk about their experiences, talk about their career, what they're working on now. And we're having a lot of fun with it, but it's also a way for me to document some of the stuff that has gone on over the past 30 or 40 years. And so we're having a lot of enjoyment. And I say we because I co-host it with Aljon Go, who has his podcast, The Disney List, that he's been doing for many years. And we just, it was a serendipitous moment because I was promoting a book on his Disney List podcast. And afterwards, he says, wow, that was just such a great conversation. He goes, if you ever want to do a podcast, let me know. And I wrote back and I said, I'd love to do a podcast. If I did one, I'd do it with you. And next thing you know, we were just talking, and we launched it in October of 2020 during the pandemic, and it seems to have really taken off. I mean, there's a lot of people talking about it and listening to it, and we have a worldwide audience, which is crazy. So I'm having a lot of fun with it, and people can find the Skull Rock podcast, on Spotify, Apple, any of the platforms that host podcasts. That they can find us.
All right. Well, the book is Claude Coats, Walt Disney's Imagineer, The Making of Disneyland from Toad Hall to the Haunted Mansion and Beyond. It's a beautiful book. It's a well-written book, and it will help deepen your sense of Disney history. So I highly recommend this book, everybody. Thank you so much for being on the show, Dave.
Thank you, John. I appreciate it, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.